All right. Thank you all for joining us. Today, we are really excited to share with you an Energize Ed session that's all about planning and development review process. So today we have Leon Lexon, who is our senior planner, part of the PDS department here, Planning and Development Services with the city. And he is going to talk to you all about this process and answer questions. Like in past sessions, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And I will kind of keep an eye on that, answer what I can, and then ask Leon questions if we don't know the answer. So I'm going to turn it over to him and let him get started. Thank you all for joining us.
All right, thank you, Melinda, and hello, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces here on my computer screen. So as Melinda mentioned, I'm a senior planner for City of Boise, specifically working in current planning and subdivisions and development review. I am leaving that position here rather soon, so I won't be doing as many public hearings and that sort of thing, but I will be at the city still, so I'll still get a chance to see many of you. But today I'm just going to kind of walk you through. Oh, sorry, my kitten here is deciding to talk to me during this presentation. I apologize. I'm just going to walk you through in general kind of how we review projects and provide you guys with some information on where you can plug in your input throughout the process. So start by sharing my screen and giving you kind of some background information. So one moment. All right. Okay, so for anyone who looked at our last or went to our last presentation, a lot of these slides will look familiar, and I just wanted to provide some quick context and kind of sync this up with the information you learned in our last Energize Ed series, which was Zoning 101. So this is about development review. As you're aware, Boise is changing. Here's some recent projects constructed or under construction in the city. We have Pioneer Crossing, I believe on the left here, and the 11th and Bannock building next to the Record Exchange on the right. Just a few examples of really how dramatic the skyline and overall our built environment is changing here in Boise. As you're aware, let me reduce this here real quick. We've been talking about this for a while, but we're anticipating quite a bit of growth here in the Treasure Valley over the next 20 years. And these numbers were, even probably two plus years ago that we were talking about 50,000 new residents, 20,000 new households, and kind of our need to build 1,000 new housing units every year. Those numbers are probably even bigger now, honestly, in terms of the number of new residents coming to our community. Boise remains one of the more popular places in the US and the Western United States for people to relocate. Many people who've left Boise are now coming back. In general, it speaks to how wonderful our community is and how everybody wants to be here. Obviously, there are implications in terms of housing supply and cost and different things like that. But again, Boise's booming, and my job and the job of development review is really to respond to the market's attempt to address demand in the form of housing and other projects like that. So again, this is kind of an overview of how land use planning and implementation, basically, we have a city vision that's created by the community in the form of a comprehensive plan. We then have sub-plans for neighborhoods and other city initiatives. And that's all distilled down to a zoning ordinance, which is essentially the tool that we use to implement all of those things. We are preparing to undergo a pretty significant rewrite of our zoning ordinance over the next 2 to 3 years. And I did see that some of my colleagues are on the call that will be a part of that. Andrea Tuning and Kathleen Lacey in comprehensive planning. But this is generally kind of how things go. And for development review, a lot of what I do and a lot of what's associated with that process falls into the zoning ordinance review. And I'll spend some time kind of walking through that here in a minute. Sorry, my kitty does not want me to give this presentation to you guys today. I'm sorry. All right. So again, the purpose of zoning, again, stuff you saw last presentation if you attended, is kind of how all these things fit together. But we want to conserve, ensure, and promote public health, safety, and welfare. We're implementing the city of Boise's vision into a plan. We're guiding future growth and land use changes. And we're balancing competing rights. And basically that's private property rights versus government oversight versus the public good. All of those things are kind of pushing and pulling against one another with any project that we have like this. One of the most significant tools we have right now to figure out where things should go and what they should look like is zoning. And here's just a map of the city of Boise, some zoning that we have. We have 23 unique zoning districts. Most parks and schools are in our A1 and A2 zones. Most residential is within our R zones. And those are varying densities that we allow within each of these. We have office uses that go to office zones, commercial that goes to the C zones, industrial and special purpose zones like St. Luke's, St. Alphonsus, and like Boise State University. Now this is, again, for another day, and hopefully maybe Andrea or Kathleen or someone in the future will give us an update on how we're going to do this differently moving forward. This is currently what's in place, but we are really considering alternatives to this sort of thing. As you can see, and as was mentioned in Ethan Mansfield's presentation last time, this is a pretty, it can be difficult to blend appropriate uses in a neighborhood when we have these rigid zoning districts that we all have to kind of try to fit things into a box. That's not really how our community works all the time, and oftentimes we struggle with, what is this land use? Where should it go? What's the appropriate zoning? That sort of thing. So our new version of this development ordinance will hopefully make that a bit easier for us and work on better design and that sort of thing. So based on that zoning, here's where we get into the zoning ordinance, which again, we're just looking at a segment here of the different zones, as you can see across the top in the dark gray, and then some different land uses that we regularly see at the city. You can note that some of those boxes are empty, which means that that's a prohibited use in that zone. Some of them have a C, which means that's a conditional use. An A means it's allowed, and an A with an asterisk means essentially the planning director can look at it and determine if it's approvable. So who are the decision makers? At the beginning, kind of a lot of what we do, the bulk of our applications that we receive annually are administrative level decisions. So these are things like somebody wants to build an accessory dwelling unit in their neighborhood or on their property in a certain neighborhood, or wants to do a snow cone stand somewhere for a seasonal use. Those are the administrative level decisions. We also have, sorry, my little green circles aren't working anymore. We also have essentially some guiding bodies. The Design Review Committee, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Historic Preservation Commission are the three that we work with the most. All that being said, Design Review Committee is largely focused on the design of projects. Historic Preservation is focused primarily on the preservation of contributing structures in historic districts, like the North End, East End, and several others throughout the city. And then Planning and Zoning Commission is more broadly focused on land use decisions. So conditional use permits, planned unit developments, variances, different things like that. Any of these things that are appealed can eventually make it to kind of that next level of decision making, which is our city council. City council also makes final action, or I think that's actually a follow-up slide here. Oh, now the green things are working. Here's kind of a matrix that shows some of those different application types that we experience or process in our community and kind of where the decisions are made. Again, rezones are a recommendation from planning and zoning and a final decision by council. That's the same for annexation. Conditional use permits are from, stop at planning and zoning, and basically anything that's appealed would also get to city council. Special exceptions stop at council. Variances can be either administrative or planning and zoning. And then design review is three different levels. Well, not three, I guess three different types: administrative level, historic preservation, and our design review group, which can be both staff level and at the committee level. here's a quick outline of those processes associated with this. And I'm going to actually walk you through our website and show you in detail some materials we've created to help kind of explain these processes in greater detail. But these flowcharts essentially explain how we get from a very initial conversation about a project, which is a pre-application conference, all the way to a final decision. And again, all decisions can be appealed or modified by City Council in the event that they are appealed. So let me jump into our city website here. Basically, here's a great section of our website that's specifically focused on development review. I'm going to walk you through some of these different materials a little later. But all of this, and I have this link available as a part of my presentation, so it could be made available to anybody who's interested about where to go find things. But let's start with an overview of the planning review process. And I can jump back and forth and kind of show you a few different things. So planning review process for public hearings, it is our intention to seek feedback and input. We mail notification to all property owners and residents within 300 feet of any subject property. Sometimes that's actually even an expanded notification if it's a larger or more complex project. We publish all of our public hearing agendas in the Idaho Statesman, or maybe it's not always the Statesman. Sometimes it might be the Idaho Business Review, but we do publish those in local newspapers. We require developers now to post their sites to inform people of what's happening there in the future, the date of a public hearing, and how they can get involved. So the city is actively seeking input on every project that comes before us. And later in this presentation, I'll kind of talk about, if you want to provide feedback, some kind of best tips in terms of how you can really be heard. I mean, I think some people have heard the term NIMBY, not in my backyard. And that's basically people adverse to any change that happens close to them. Completely understandable. Change is hard for a lot of people. If you want to be effective in your testimony or effective in shaping a project, you need to understand the zoning associated with the property, the vision for that piece of property as it's detailed in the comprehensive plan. And then you need to think about specific things that, if it is going to happen next door, how can I maybe make it better for me and my neighborhood in the form of perhaps building design, building height, the intensity of the use. If it's a multifamily project, maybe one entry point into the conversation would be, X number of units are proposed, but based on some things we've looked at for like transportation and other things like that, we think that maybe this number of units would be a better option. So that's kind of a way to provide some effective testimony. But again, we'll go into that a little bit later. So in terms of the planning review process, as I mentioned before, it starts with this pre-application meeting, wherein a applicant provides a kind of a concept of their proposal to the city. We typically need some level of detail and plans. They provide a site plan, some elevation, some description of the use so that we can, one, figure out what the use is and where it fits in our zoning code and if it's appropriate for that property. That's kind of the initial threshold that anybody has to pass. And then beyond that, we kind of spend that meeting explaining to them how they ultimately create an application for the city and hold their neighborhood meeting, as highlighted here, and how they prepare for a public hearing process. So again, pre-application is kind of everything happening here. They're working towards a submittal date. Neighborhood meetings are required of many of our, any hearing level application, neighborhood meeting is typically required. I should back off that a little bit. Design review does not require neighborhood meetings, but anything going to our Planning and Zoning Commission does require a neighborhood meeting. And at that meeting, the developer is really supposed to share with you what they're planning to submit to the city. Let's take a look here. So we'll go into that neighborhood meeting real quick. So this is kind of some best practices. We've written these for a variety of audiences. If you're the applicant, some things you should focus on. We do have very specific requirements about when the meeting's held, in advance of an application, what day of the week it can be held, and what time of the day. So basically, just jump right into the fact that they either need to hold the meeting on site or within 2 miles of the project site. Obviously, that's easier during nicer weather. In the wintertime, that can be a real challenge. But yeah, within 2 miles of the project site. It has to be held Monday through Thursday between 6 and 8 p.m. That doesn't mean that the developer has to stay on site from 6 to 8 p.m. Generally, they start, note that the meeting starts at 6 and will stick around for 30 or 45 minutes to an hour. We've had some developers who do a really poor job with this and some that do a great job. We have some that have attempted to show up for 2 minutes and close the meeting down and leave and claim that nobody came. That's really not what we recommend developers do in fulfilling this requirement for the city. The applicant has to send out the notice to all of the neighbors. And it's, again, everyone who is within 300 feet, either a property owner or an occupant. They need to describe what they're doing. They need to show as many plans as they possibly can to the people who attend. And these things can change, obviously, between pre-application meeting, neighborhood meeting, and final submittal to the city. We do encourage them to basically make it as whatever submittal they make to the city, align it as closely as possible to the neighborhood meeting materials that they shared, or if they've made adjustments based on the neighborhood meeting. So say people are upset about the design of the building or the number of units or intensity, they can respond to that by adjusting their submittal to the city. They need to explain to us in a letter of explanation, outlining their process, basically why they made that change. So that's one of the things that we often see with developers. There's a sign-in sheet required at those neighborhood meetings. So if you attend and they ask you to sign in, it's really, they're just trying to fulfill one of the requirements of the city. So some best practices, we do encourage them to meet with neighbors when the plan design is still somewhat flexible. Again, this is kind of a little contrary. I mean, we don't want it to be so flexible that what's ultimately submitted to the city is drastically different than what people saw at that neighborhood meeting. That generally tends to upset people quite a bit. So they need to be close to an idea, but again, they can change based on feedback that they hear at that neighborhood meeting. Neighborhood associations are required to be notified for any project. And I think we have many neighborhood association leaders here with us today. You are kind of a conduit of information between the residents of your neighborhood and the city and back and forth. We rely heavily on your leadership to kind of both keep your residents informed about what the city is doing, but also to make us aware of what your residents are concerned about with specific projects or overall initiatives. So here's some of that information about arriving 10 to 15 minutes early, wait 30 minutes past the scheduled time before leaving, certainly make a point of introducing yourself. The city does not attend these neighborhood meetings. We specifically do that largely because our goal is for you to have a direct conversation with the applicant. If the city were to attend, it would largely become kind of a conversation between the residents and the city about, is this legal? Can they do this? And that's determined once we receive the application, we start making a recommendation. So again, that's kind of the major reason that the city does not attend these initial neighborhood meetings. Having materials there, providing contact information, inviting people to have follow-up conversations with them. Those are all things that we strongly encourage. And many developers who've been more successful than others, will often hold that meeting and then circle back with members of the neighborhood or the association with any changes or updates they made as a result of the conversation they had. That's another kind of best practice that we strongly recommend. And so for neighborhood associations, again, kind of to the point of some of the stuff I was mentioning earlier, being as informed about the development code and the comprehensive plan and any specific plans in your neighborhood we encourage all neighborhood leaders to do that because, again, we want you to be able to share the information about your neighborhood, both from the city side, but also from the resident side understanding the planning that's going on in your neighborhood is really one of the best ways for you to have intelligent conversations with people about, what's going on, different proposals they may see. So we strongly encourage you to do that. Certainly introducing yourself at the meeting as a neighborhood association leader is a good idea. One, a lot of folks are unaware that they live in the neighborhood association area. So for you, it's a good opportunity to get to know more of the people in your neighborhood area. Again, being informed about the processes, and once you as a neighborhood leader go to a few of these, you start to understand how this works, and you can be a local resource for people to understand the process a little bit better and direct them to the information that they need. And then finally, really kind of after the meeting, you want to be available to the applicant and ensure that you follow up with them if there's ongoing concerns about the project. That is a lot of work for neighborhood association leaders, and we do recognize that you're not being paid for this, and it's all volunteer, and we do appreciate you so much. But, part of what makes strong neighborhood associations is active leadership that's heavily involved in these conversations with developers and the city about the different proposals that they see. And then for the neighbors, this is where you get a chance to really understand the project. We encourage everyone to be as cordial as possible. And if you have concerns, state those concerns. But, I think there's a way to have a conversation involving different viewpoints in a productive way, and there's a way to do it in a not so productive way. And keeping your cool, questioning is super important, and having them explain to you why they think this works and why they're, why are they proposing this, like really getting into the nuts and bolts of the proposal. I strongly encourage people who attend these meetings to do that, because the thing we always tell applicants at the city is that, the neighborhood meeting is an effort to inform the people in the area about what's going on, but it's also an opportunity for that applicant to understand what resistance or what challenges or concerns might exist in the neighborhood. So you stating this early on at this neighborhood meeting, you'll have a follow-up opportunity later on as we get into, we look at the development review process here pretty quick. You'll have an opportunity to write in testimony. You'll have an opportunity to speak at the public hearing. So remaining consistent in your concern and understanding the project, those are keys, and that's kind of a big deal for the developer as well, or the applicant, to understand what they're up against. And I think it's really an opportunity for everyone to get on the same page in terms of what's being proposed, not necessarily agree about what's being proposed, but just fully understanding what's going on in their neighborhood. So here's a kind of a handy spreadsheet available, or not spreadsheet, but kind of a flow chart available on our website that concisely identifies some of the things I've been talking about. So we're kind of still within this pre-application phase here. Once they finally make application to the city, we enter the project review phase. And what goes on there is not only notifying neighbors in the neighborhood association, but also all of the agencies in the area that weigh in on an application. So that would be the Ada County Highway District, the Boise Fire Department, any school district, be it Boise School District or West Ada, Central District Health, just any agency in the area. We transmit the application to them for comments, and essentially both of those comments and then any public comments that we receive, we integrate into what is known as a staff report. And I'll pull it up here in just a minute as I go to show you some properties in the area that I personally have worked on recently. I'll show you some of the documents that we receive and some of the comments that we typically receive. But a staff report is generated, and the purpose of that staff report is, again, to synthesize all of the requirements of the code, the guidance of the comprehensive plan, comments from public agencies, comments from the public, and put forth a recommendation to whatever guiding body were before about what should happen with this proposal. And there are a variety of options that can occur. It can be a denial. It can be an approval as submitted. It can be an approval with conditions. We can defer to request additional information if we feel like there's inadequate information within the materials submitted. So all of those are kind of options that can come out of that staff report and kind of the subsequent public hearing process. As I mentioned before, essentially any decision made can be appealed. And that is basically there's a 10-day appeal period following any decision on a project. And in order to appeal, you have to have commented on the project in the past. So you submitted written testimony or you spoke at the public hearing. Attending the neighborhood meeting does not qualify you to submit an appeal. You have to actually, after the application is submitted, provide some testimony. So any decision can be appealed by anyone. Even the applicant can appeal if there are conditions put on the project that they don't agree with, if there's a decision made on the project that they don't agree with. And then those appeals are generally heard by city council. We do, with design review and some other groups, we do have kind of an interim step at planning and zoning, but ultimately city council hears the bulk of our appeals at the city. So to show you kind of some of what these things look like in real life, I'm going to pull up some projects. So this is, and I do see that there are like 13 comments. So Melinda, if at any point you want me to pause and answer questions, this is very free flowing. I don't have any problem with that. In fact, maybe I'll go.
That's okay. I've got an eye on the comments. So
Okay.
We're good.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so basically, what do you do when someone submits an application in your neighborhood and you want to know more about it? Other than attending the neighborhood meeting, which I have strongly encouraged already, you can look up projects in PDS online. So this is PDS Planning and Development Services. This is the city portal to basically any permit submitted. And you can search by permit number, you can search by address. Let's see if I can find one here quickly that we didn't get a lot of public comment on. So I do want to show some of those. Let me think about a project really quick. I apologize for not having one. I had one in mind, but I just realized there wasn't much public testimony. So, well, yeah, no, I won't do that. Let's see. Also, good opportunity to introduce you to the city property viewer and GIS system. Hopefully many of you have used this. This is available to, to anyone through the City of Boise website, and there is a link in my presentation that you can follow later on. So very quickly, I'll identify or kind of walk through a project that I worked on at this location, South Federal Way and Amity Road. It is a townhome project. It's actually currently under construction to a certain extent. I don't know if anybody lives in this area right now and has seen that, but basically the idea is to locate some townhomes on this site. So when you're in the City of Boise property viewer, you can search by address up here, as I mentioned before, and you can also turn on a variety of layers to understand zoning and land uses and different things like that. What I'm going to highlight today is our permitting history layer, which basically allows you to turn this layer on and take a look at essentially any entitlement made on the property over the years. We're going to look at PUD 1615. That's the plan unit development that I worked on for this project. So we'll search by permit number in PDS Online. And for anybody who needs this to go slower or wants a follow-up here, you're always welcome to call or email or call anybody in the planning department to have them walk you through this. It's very handy for people to be able to understand, basically get to the materials that have been submitted to the city, to basically look at everything that the city's looking at to determine if they're okay with the project, if they understand anything. So as you can see up here, this project actually was appealed to City Council. It was for 28 townhomes, and what I wanted to show you was really kind of the project report that we put together in order to bring forth a recommendation to the city. I think this is probably the one that I want. Could be, oh, that's not the one. There's another one. Hold on. Yeah, this is definitely it because it's a much larger file that will take a while to download. But essentially what this is, it's a packet of materials, everything essentially submitted to the city from the initial application made, including letter of explanation, plans associated with the project. We also incorporate any agency reviews, and we also incorporate public comments. But there's a section of this, kind of a meatier section, where we state, a decision or a recommendation for a decision. I'll zoom in here a little bit. So just to outline very quickly what a staff report contains, there's usually a summary of what was proposed here. In this case, it's a 28-unit planned residential development. There was also a height exception, and there was, looks like we had a variance for some setbacks along the front for a retaining wall. It's kind of a steep site, so they had to do some unique things with the entry road for this. And there was a hillside development permit. So that's the summary. Down here is essentially kind of concisely stated reason for the decision that our commission, in this case, Planning and Zoning Commission, they kind of read this first to understand where staff's coming from. The recommendation up here is clearly stated so they can know, okay, this is the recommending approval of each request. And so we could concisely kind of summarize why this can be approved. And as we walk through here, you'll see a reason for the decision for each application submitted. We generally try to include some maps and aerials showing surrounding properties and uses, the zoning in place. It is a large file, so sorry, it's going to take a little bit of time. But basically, I wanted to reduce this a little bit. Sorry, pretty large file, guys. It doesn't seem to want to cooperate too well. Anyways, we include all of this in our packets to the commission. We include the application, and here's where I wanted to direct everyone. So this is really the detailed analysis that staff does, and I'll zoom in a little bit here so you can see it better. But essentially, we list, when this project was notified to the public, what the request is, who the applicant is. That's all pertinent information at the beginning of the staff report. But through here is where we kind of analyze, per the development code and comprehensive plan, all the things we have to consider. Is there enough parking? What's the bulk and mass of this project? What's the transportation situation look like in terms of how many new trips will be created on adjacent roadways? What the setbacks and dimensional standards look like, and then any applicable codes. So the zoning ordinance here, any applicable goals or policies of the comprehensive plan identified here. And then here is really where we provide a more detailed analysis of the project, kind of dive into what's being requested, why it's supportable, and if it's not supportable as is, are there any recommended changes we could make to the project to mitigate some of those concerns? So that's what you'll find within the staff report. And then just show you a couple more things here real quick. The approval criteria, which are also within our development code. Basically, for any project of this nature, there are a multitude of development or approval criteria that have to be met. So in this case, is the location compatible to uses in the general neighborhood? We provide a description here of why we think it is or isn't, if that's the case for projects that we're recommending denial for or changes to. What are the impacts to public services and facilities, the transportation system, and so forth. Is the site large enough to accommodate the use? And that becomes interesting when we're talking about variances, because a variance is essentially a request to modify some of the dimensional standards to allow a use to fit on a site. Let's see. Will there be any adverse impacts on adjacent properties? And then finally, is it in compliance with the comprehensive plan? So we walk through all of that analysis and land at recommended conditions of approval that can be adopted by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And in here, we'll state very specifically things that might need to happen, like this 9-foot retaining wall is allowed, but it has to look like this. We can offer a height exception, but it's only 7 feet 1 inches above the 35 foot. So this is very specific conditions attached to projects like that. So I won't bore you anymore with staff report stuff that can get a little intense sometimes, but this is the document as a neighborhood resident that you would really want to focus on to understand all of the thinking that went into the project, both the staff's review and analysis of the project, any agency comments, so ACHD, fire, different things like that. And then also to read the comments of your neighbors or other people who are concerned with the project. And in this case, I'll try to get you to some of those. We put those at the end of the document so they're easy, frankly, for people to see. But yeah, we receive these in the form of email or written comments, and they're always integrated into the packets as well, so that our commission can be aware of concerns in the neighborhood. Just want to quickly orient you to a couple more things available on our website, and then maybe I'll pause to do some Q&A with everyone or touch on things that other people are interested in. So City Planning Handbook, this is something that myself and Planning Director and a few other folks in the department worked on to kind of provide people with an overview of what planning looks like, planning and development, the development review process. These are some initiatives under the former Mayor Beater. New Mayor McLean will have some of her own, and we'll probably update this document at that point to talk about those. But really just kind of high level, what's going on with city initiatives, the comprehensive plan, how do we use that, zoning ordinance. So for anybody who wants kind of a crash course or even a quick summary of what I'm talking about here today, I would recommend going and reading this document, the City Planning Handbook. And again, there's a link available on the website. Let's see. Sorry, guys. All right, so let's get to this part right here, which I think is something that a lot of people wanted to talk about. Providing testimony at a public hearing, and this is kind of where I'll stop and maybe answer some questions for everybody. So again, here there's another great PDF that you can make use of that essentially gives you an overview of how do you provide comment. If you're going to provide comment, what are some best practices in terms of things that you can do? Here's public hearing procedures, which is really important for people to understand. We have limits on the amount of time that you can speak at a public hearing as a neighborhood association. It's generally 15 to 20 minutes, but reality is however much time the applicant takes, the neighborhood association gets that same amount of time. Our city leadership is always able to step outside of that and grant more time if they deem it appropriate. But just as a heads up, that's generally kind of the guideline. If the developer takes 10 minutes, the neighborhood association gets 10 minutes to talk about what they're concerned about. And then for the general public, it's 3 minutes of testimony. And you can also write in comments in advance, which is something that we strongly recommend people do, because that 3 minutes can be frankly, a little nerve-wracking sometimes when it's a chamber full of 100 or plus people, and you're trying to get everything out there in a concise manner, and it's late in the evening. I just always encourage people to try to write in comments as early as possible so that they can make sure they're getting everything out there that they want to. But the in-person testimony is very effective and important too. So down below, providing effective testimony. Again, you can do written or electronic comments. We recommend you try to speak to the facts and the approval criteria that the city has used. It can't simply be, I don't want more housing next to my house or something like that. I mean, you have to attach it to some of the approval criteria or the facts of the project to really carry some weight with that commission. As a neighborhood association, we've seen some real success with broader. So associations are often made up of a minimum of like 3 to 4 people, president, VP, treasurer, secretary, so forth. In many cases, each of those individuals has taken a segment of the neighborhood association's concern and spoken to it in a joint presentation. We do think that's generally a good way to go. Really, unfortunately, you can't ask questions during your testimony. The time for asking questions is really earlier on in the process before the public hearing starts. So that's why using PDS Online is really important. And one of the key benefits, one, you'll always find a contact up here for a person that you can reach out to that's the planner working on the project. But as someone within 300 feet, you'll also receive a hearing letter. So let's see, or essentially a notice. So this is a kind of a card that you would receive in the mail. And the important thing here is kind of gives you some overview of like how you participate in this process, where the meeting's located, how to testify, what does our consent agenda mean, giving us a call, or if it's a specific transportation related thing, Ada County Highway District might be a better group for you to reach out initially or attend one of their hearings. But it also just provides, again, kind of an overview of the project and then who you can contact in the event that you have questions or you want to submit comments. So again, paying attention to these cards is a really important thing for everyone. So I can go back to the well, again, I think we've kind of covered a lot of providing effective public testimony. I want to leave us plenty of time to ask questions or to hear comments. So, Melinda, maybe I'll just hand it off to you now to start doing some of that. And I won't stop sharing my screen if people want me to go back to look at something.
Great, thanks. We actually just had a question in the chat. Says, by the time the public hearing takes place, has the design review already been completed? And if so, the public hearing is a little late to make comment on that. Is that correct?
Well, design review. So I guess we're talking about a few different things here. If it's a plan unit development or a conditional use permit, there will often be an associated design review application. As our code is written, design review happens after the Planning and Zoning Commission decision. That being said, design review can't change the nature of a project from, say, the number of units proposed or different things like that. It can talk about the bulk and mass and materials used on the project. So I'm not sure that's exactly what was being asked, but I wanted to outline that process there. Basically, if I'm understanding the question in a broader sense, the application is submitted to the city. There is time between that submittal and essentially giving the public hearing to request changes for the design of the project. And that's what the public testimony will do. It can say we want fewer units, or we want more units, or we want shorter buildings or taller buildings, or more landscaping. So there is an opportunity to plug in about that design throughout the process, even through the public hearing. I mean, you can make those requests of the commission at the hearing. You can say, we have concerns about this project and its impact on our adjacent property. And for that reason, we would like a 10-foot landscape buffer with 8 new trees planted to better buffer our property. That is a request that you can make. And that is something that our commission can fold into their decision if they deem it appropriate at the public hearing. So I don't know if that answers the question. If they have a follow-up, I'd be happy to try to answer that.
If people do have further questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions. That's all we have in the chat for right now.
Oh, okay.
Leon, maybe a little bit to what types of things, specifically maybe planning and zoning, is really interested in hearing from neighbors versus any changes that you would potentially recommend making to testimony if you were in front of city council.
Okay, planning and zoning versus city council. Well, planning and zoning is specifically identified as the lead land use decision-making body. So they are focused on transportation. They're focused on residential density. They're focused on, public services in the form of fire department access, and they really dig into the very specific nature of the land use. Whereas city council, they again are kind of the umbrella over all of the guiding bodies and essentially can speak to anything in the event that they have it appealed to them. But yeah, planning and zoning is very down on the ground. How's this project going to function within the neighborhood? Have we considered parking? Have we considered all these dimensional standards? Are there variances that they need? So really that's what planning and zoning is specifically focused on. I would say city council is again at a higher level of, is this a good project for the community? I mean, they're bound by the same approval criteria, but they, I think, get to take kind of a broader look at those things in a way that P&Z or planning and zoning is, again, looking at everything between the pages of the staff report and determining if the recommendation is appropriate. So.
Right, thank you. Any other questions from the group?
I think we have someone who raised his hand. Joe?
Yeah, that would be me. Leon, if you can, neighborhood meetings. It really starts, the process really should start with the neighborhood meetings. I think we can all agree to that. My question is, have you noticed a sense, I mean, there's been a lot of change in developers in the process of the notices, et cetera, they're posted. Are you seeing a trend that developers are really starting to consider this as being more than a check the box opportunity? And I think I'm actually quoting Jennifer Stevens on that one. But they would show up, hold their meetings, and leave. We really needed them to engage the process with the neighbors and say, hey, okay, I understand you got some reservations. Let's see what we can do to work on that.
Yeah.
What's the trend? What are you seeing at the planning level now on people's sense about the neighborhood meetings?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in general, there's a trend towards holding better neighborhood meetings and really listening to people. I think that that's been encouraged by both the former mayor and administrator or city council and the current mayor. I mean, I can personally attest to a period of time arriving here in the Treasure Valley, 2009, 2010. We were all trying to climb out of the recession. Any project that came in was just good because the community was trying to, get things fired up again. And so I think at that time we were just willing to say, all right, you want to do something here? Let's talk about how to get something done. And I think that Boise its economy has gotten so strong and the housing market has gotten so strong and there's so much interest in being here that we've actually had the opportunity to push on developers a lot more and say, hey, you want to do something here, but our community needs this. It needs to look like this. We need a higher level of design. By the way, here are all these initiatives we have, a robust comprehensive plan. So you need to respond to all that stuff and come back with a better project. And I think we've seen a lot more of that happening. And I think, there's always going to be the developer who just tries to check the box and get through the process. But I've personally worked with dozens of developers who are taking this very serious now, holding multiple neighborhood meetings on their own, even without the city requesting them to do that, so that they can hopefully get it right at the start and be successful at the public hearing at the end. So.
Leon, we have another question here in the chat. It says, for a residential project, sorry about the barking dogs in my background, for a residential project, at what stage does the public hearing take place and who initiates the public hearing?
Yeah, okay, well, it depends on the nature of the residential project. I mean, if it's just a home addition or a accessory dwelling unit or something like that, that's a staff level approval. If it's a new subdivision or a new planned unit development or a new multifamily project of some kind, there's a planning and zoning public hearing essentially attached to that. And same for design review. If it's over a certain number of units or a certain size of project, there will be a design review committee meeting. So the process really gets started when the applicant sends out the notices for the neighborhood meeting. That's a requirement of the city. They can't make application to the city until that neighborhood meeting is held, and it has to be held in a certain way, as I mentioned earlier. So I'd say that really kicks it off. And then in terms of who schedules it, we have a hearing schedule online, which is something I can share with the group if you're interested. But basically, applicants have to make a certain deadline, meet a certain deadline in order to kind of get queued up to get in front of planning and zoning or city council or design review. And from there, the city takes over kind of the notification process. So we'll send the initial letter like, hey, a hearing's been scheduled. And we do copy the neighborhood association on those letters as well. So that's kind of the initial, like, this is when the hearing's happening, and here's a link to more information on the project. And then basically we get to the point where we send out those little postcards that I showed everybody earlier that kind of describe the process, describe the project, and give you links for more information or to people that you can speak to if you have concerns. That's kind of the last notice, other than the on-site posting that we require everyone to do. But yeah, it's at the city's discretion basically to schedule the hearing once an application is received. We are bound by certain timeliness standards. We can't just sit on someone's application forever. But yeah, after the application is submitted, it's on the city to figure out how to get it to the public hearing stage.
Thanks, Leon. We also will be sharing out the slide deck from today, and I think you had a good kind of flow chart on there as well that might be helpful to people, so you can always go back and reference that later. I just want to put in a small plug here. If you've been watching the chat, Andrea brought this up a little while ago, but this city will be moving away from the PDS online system, and we will be starting a new software whole online system for this. So it's called Acela, and there are multiple trainings that are available that we're really encouraging everybody to go to. That way you fully understand how to use that new system, and you'll be able to find the information that you're looking for about things that are happening in your neighborhood. So Andrea posted a link, and there are dates on there where you can sign up to register for those training workshops for the new system. So there's one coming up on July 28th at 8:30, July 29th from 3 to 4 p.m., and August 5th from 1 to 2 p.m. So we will I'll share that in the chat again. That way you guys have that and you can see those links. Looks like we have another question specifically about that. Maybe Leon or potentially any of the other planners on here who want to chime in about this. It says, can you give us your professional assessment outlook of the PDS to Acela transition? It's a good question.
I'm happy to start weighing in on that. We're excited about it. We spent a lot of time trying to make this happen. It's been a multi-year process, transitioning from some old systems that we had into what we're going to be offering the community and using internally ourselves within the next, frankly, at this point, just a few months. I think it's going well. I think we're, I think for anybody, change is hard, and we all become accustomed to our old systems. And so there's been a lot of learning and growing pains, but I'm confident in the new platform, and I think it'll be much easier for the public to make use of as well. I think it's a lot more intuitive than kind of what we've been offering for a while. So, and if anybody else wants to comment on that, I'd love to hear that. So.
Hi, everybody. This is Kathleen Lacey. Oh, I see Andrea is going to speak also, but I'm a city planner, and yesterday and today I received my first training in Acela after a 3-year process. I think it's going to be great. So I really want to assure everybody that it's an easy, intuitive process. The information is readily accessible, and I'm excited about it. I've been concerned because I heard all the difficulties that have been come in as the program was developed. But my goodness, I think you're going to really like it. And it looks like Andrea is going to follow up with a comment.
Yes, good afternoon. As Kathleen had noted, we have, as staff, been learning the Acela process. And once you are able to get into the system, the search capabilities are really fantastic. And as Betty had noted earlier, do you search by the original address or by the newly subdivided address? The new Acela process allows you to actually access it either utilizing the old address, the new address, or you can actually go to a map and visually find that parcel and look up the information that way. So it makes it very interactive and very user-friendly. So I think you are all going to really enjoy the new capabilities that the Acela program is going to offer us.
We have another raised hand.
See someone clapping. I don't see a hand raised.
Oh, sorry.
Other questions that anybody would like to throw out there before we wrap up here? All right. If you think of questions, as always, you can feel free to email them to us at energize@cityofboise, and I will direct them to the appropriate person to get them answered for you. And we will be posting the slide deck from this presentation. That way you can check out those flowcharts and other information. Those will be on our website, hopefully by tomorrow. So thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Leon.